Welcome back, everyone. We are in the shop today. Today we're going to be working on James's E46. We are going to be installing the Villains dual drilled hubs. I used to make these hubs myself. I kind of just got over it. I didn't really want to make them anymore, so Villains decided to start making them, so we're going to just use theirs. Nate's a really great machinist. He knows what he's doing, so I have full faith that these are going to be top-notch and very good quality. I've never had a problem with any of the Villains Drift products. So yeah, we're going to get that installed, and this is how it goes. All right, these are the Villains hubs. These are drilled 5L114 as well as obviously the 5L120. So pretty straightforward. These ones on the left are your fronts. They have a wheel bearing attached. The rears are just a flange. So when you're doing the rears, you need to make sure you order wheel bearings for the rear. You're gonna have to press those out. When you press out the flanges, the rear wheel bearings will come apart. So make sure you order wheel bearings for the rear before you do this job. Next step's gonna be jack the car up or put it on a lift. And then in my case, I have a car on the lift, so we went ahead and just jacked up the fronts here. We're going to knock out the fronts first and foremost. We got our jack stands under there. We're going to go ahead and we're going to take off the wheels, and then at that point we will take off the brake calipers, we'll take off the brake rotors, and then I will be able to access the hub itself on the front. I'm going to walk you through that whole thing, so here we go. Now that you've got the front wheel off the car, we need to go ahead and get the caliper off. So we're going to have these two 16mm bolts, one here, one down there. Next step's going to be taking that off so we can get the caliper off the car. Okay, we've got the caliper off now. In this case, we got to get this spacer out of the way, and then the next thing is going to be to take the rotor off. We'll need to get this set screw out. To get the set screw out, you are going to need a 6mm hex head. That's it. That's the set screw. Now we can go ahead and we can pull this rotor off here, and here is our hub. So the next thing we need to do here is we need to remove this dust cover to gain access to the nut that holds the hub onto the front spindle. What I like to do to get these off is just take a flathead screwdriver, a hammer, and just kind of work that lip out to where it pops the cap off. It's probably going to bend that cap a little bit, but we can straighten that back out. That's not too big of a deal. Once it starts coming out, you can kind of just start working the screwdriver. Bam, that's off. Now that we have that dust cover off, you can see here there's kind of a knock-in on this spindle nut. I like to just take a screwdriver or a pry bar and then just pry that out so that it's not hanging up on that, and then we'll just loosen this nut and get this hub off. Okay, so the next step is going to be to get this nut off. You're going to need a 46mm socket. That's a big one. Now the next step is going to be we need to drill out the front rotor to be able to have both patterns on the rotor as well. All right, now we've moved over to the workbench area. We've got our hub here, we've got our rotor. You'll either have your existing rotor or a new rotor. This one's relatively new, so we're gonna go ahead and reuse this one. We don't have like a big lip or anything, but if you have brakes that need to be replaced, this is the time to replace them, because you have to drill these rotors to get the holes for the 5L114 pattern to be accessible. So what I went ahead and did is I pulled the lug bolts and I bolted those in. I made sure that my rotor set screw lines up with the rotor as well. That way we know exactly where it needs to be and we get all the holes in the right places. We'll flip this over and then we will take a transfer punch. And what this is it's a punch that's, you know, bigger, and it's got a center punch here. What that'll allow us to do is slide this right into the holes that have been drilled, and we can transfer them right into the same position. That way we don't mess it up when we go to try to drill these things out and go off to the left or the right, whatever. This makes sure that we get it in the right spot and we can start drilling in the right spot. All right, so that's how you use those. If you do not have any of these, they're actually relatively cheap. You can get them on Amazon, I think, for like 20 bucks. And it'll come as like a whole set, kind of like that. Super, super cheap. On to the next step here. I'm gonna get my drill press set up over here so we can make sure we drill nice and straight holes. If you don't have a drill press, you can probably do it with a hand drill. It's really not that difficult. These don't need to be super, super precise. You just need to make sure that they line up with the holes. They are going to end up being a little bit bigger, so you'll have a little bit of wiggle room here to make sure that you can get the rotor and the lug studs or bolts in there with no problem. So don't get too nervous. It's not like super to 1,000 precise or anything like that, so there is a little bit of room for error. All right, we've got our drill press all set up here. I'm going to use a smaller bit to start out with, but wanted to show you what the transfer punch does. You can see right here this tiny little divot. That transfer punch has that little sharp end on it and gets us a nice centering hole so that when we get our drill bit on here, it centers up on that hole and doesn't move around. This is extremely helpful if you're doing this without a drill press. If you're gonna do this with a hand drill, you absolutely 100% need to use the transfer punches. Okay, we're gonna get this fired up and going. All right, like that, we got our 5 pilot holes. Next step, I'm gonna change this bit out. We're gonna go up to our 9/16 bit, and we're gonna drill the rest of these holes out. So I'll spare you the swapping bits part here and skip forward. And we're back with the 9/16 bit. Gonna throw a little lube on there. You probably see me doing that on the smaller bit as well. So it's always good to have a little bit of cutting oil. Just helps save bits and stuff like that. I'll spare you watching a very long process of doing this or whatever. I'm gonna get these other 3 holes drilled out, and then I'll show you what that all looks like once it's all done. And here we have the rotor all drilled out. So from the top view, you can see where I made sure I located this set screw for the rotor. You want to make sure that happens so that you can still use the set screw, and then make sure all your holes are lined up after the fact. So that's going to help a lot. The next thing I just went ahead and did real quick is I just grabbed a stepper bit on my drill and just put a light little chamfer on here. You can see kind of like the OE one. It's got a little bit of a chamfer. We just clean those edges up, make sure they're deburred, and that's it. That's your rotor. It's drilled. It's ready to go. Now we can install the hub back on the car, which is all pretty straightforward. You will slide it back on and reinstall it back in the same process that you took it all apart. All right, so moving on to the rear of the car, we need to remove everything here. So there's a few different ways to do this. One way, which is the way we're going to do it because we are also going to be changing a trailing arm bushing, is we're going to remove the entire trailing arm out of the car and then go ahead and press the bearing using our wheel bearing puller, as well as we'll do that bushing. Another option is leaving the trailing arm on the car, using your wheel bearing puller to pull the wheel bearing and the hub off while leaving the trailing arm on the car. It's totally doable using the tools that I'll be using in this video. The third option is removing the trailing arm and using an actual bench press. Or using a press itself, and then that way you can just hydraulically press out the bearing in the flange. But since the more common option is going to be using a wheel bearing puller, I'm going to go ahead and do that just to show you how to do all of that. So first thing we need to do is we need to get these calipers out of the way. We do have a dual caliper setup on this car, so this may or may not apply to you. But yeah, we'll remove this caliper, and then the stock caliper. The stock caliper will come off with two 16mm bolts. I like to just use a wrench on those. The upper and lower control arm bolts are 18mm. You'll need a socket and a wrench to get those off. The shock is an 18mm bolt. The axle nut has some variations depending on which you have in your car. This car has a 30mm 12 point. Some of the 330s and M3s will have a 36mm nut there, so just depends on which car you have exactly. Will differentiate which socket you'll need to get that off. But yeah, here we go. Okay, so once we get to this point, we have the axle is loose. We need to get this hub flange off. So what we're going to use is a slide hammer. That'll go on the front of this. We'll bolt it down with some lug nuts, and then we'll slide hammer this hub out of here. It will probably pull the bearing apart. It's totally normal. That's why we say you need to replace the bearings. So I'll show you what that slide hammer looks like in that process. Okay, here is our slide hammer. It is exactly what it sounds like. It is a slide that has a weight here. You slide that against the backside, essentially like a hammer. It's going to pull this hub out of the trailing arm. And there you have it. The hub is out. You can see it did pull the wheel bearing apart. 99.99% of the time that's going to happen. So that's why we got new bearings. The next step for us is we're going to pull the trailing arm out of the car. If you're going to do the bearing on the car, you can just take the snap ring out and then set up your wheel bearing puller. I'll show you what that looks like on the bench. Since we're going to be doing it on the bench, but you would just install it the same way, just on the car, and do the pulling process and pressing process on the car. But like I said, in our case, we got to do a trailing arm bushing on this car, so I'm just going to pull the whole trailing arm out. And that's our trailing arm out of it. So a couple things I forgot to mention that I'll just make sure we cover here. So 16mm for the caliper bolts, 18mm for the shock bolt, 18mm socket and wrench for the upper and lower control arm. And then if you're pulling then your 30 or 36mm axle nut. If you go to pull the trailing arm, obviously you're going to have these front trailing arm brackets. Those are held in with 18mm as well. And then you have, depending on which side you're working on, a couple of electrical connections for the wheel speed sensors or brake pad wear sensor. Those just go into a little black box. You pop that box open, pull the connectors apart, and you're done there. We're going to move on to the bench and show you how to do the wheel bearing side of things. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so now that we have the hub out of the trailing arm via the slide hammer, obviously we did that on the car, brought the trailing arm over here, and then now we have this snap ring we need to remove. So you'll just get a pair of snap ring pliers and then get those in there and remove the snap ring. They usually go flying, so there's that. Now I'll get the wheel bearing puller set up, and I'll show you what that looks like to pull this wheel bearing out of the trailing arm. Now we have our wheel bearing puller set up here. You'll see these, yeah, I think you can rent these out like most parts stores. If not, you can buy them on Amazon. They're not crazy expensive, or find a buddy that has one and borrow it. Essentially what you have is you have a big bolt that runs through the middle of this. You have a plate on the back side here with a nut. You'll tighten this bolt, and that plate with the nut will start to pull the bearing outward into this big cup. So you'll take your impact wrench and there you have it. That one was really in there. This is actually pretty hot, but there is our wheel bearing out. Now we just have to do that pretty much in the reverse order to press the bearing back into the hub. I'll get that all set up and show you. Setup has changed, so now we're going to be drawing this inward. So I have a spacer that is larger than the hole in the back on the back to hold the nut and everything, and then we're going to drive this side in. I did put a little bit of wheel bearing grease on the trailing arm where it is sliding into the bearing is sliding into the trailing arm. That'll help get this in there nice and smooth, hopefully. But yeah, here we go. Okay, so that is the first part of it. I like to use a bigger part to get everything started, just so it's easier to square up. Now I have to find one that's going to match the outside diameter of the wheel bearing so that we can get it fully seated into the trailing arm. That way we can get our snap ring back in. That's our wheel bearing in. Now we just need to reinstall the snap ring, and then we're ready to go back. Well, then we're ready to press our hub back into this, and I'll show you where to go with that. Just wanted to show the setup to press the flange back in using the wheel bearing puller. I made these little spacers essentially. The reason why I made these is because if you don't have something here to hold the inner race of the bearing and you try to push this inward, the flange can catch that inner race and push the bearing out the back side. So what we want to do is make sure, in my case, the kit that I had didn't have like a spacer or anything that had the right offset. So I just made these spacers, but you could probably go grab some big heavy duty washers from the hardware store or something like that. But so now we have those spacers there with the, I put that on the wrong way. We're gonna flip that guy around. With this on the back side, so when I'm tightening this bolt and pulling this flange in, this is holding the backside so that that bearing can't come out this way. So just wanted to share that bit. I'm going to go ahead and get this pressed back in, and then I went ahead and put this car back together. You pretty much put the rear back together the same way you took it apart. If you didn't take the trailing arm off, well, great. Your life was probably a little bit easier. You didn't have to take a bunch of other stuff apart. And then you press that bearing the same way that we showed you on the bench. But yeah, that concludes the installation of the Villains 5-on-114 BMW hub conversion, front and rear. We want to say thank you for following us, watching this video, and then if you like it, make sure you like it. If you have any questions, comment down below. We'll make sure we get those answered for you. And then subscribe if you want to see more install videos. Those are coming.